Hello, this is Editor Emerald here. If you watched the last video, you would know that I said in this video I'd be covering New Testament 22R, and then I would be answering some questions and kind of reflecting on New Testament now that I have finished it. But unfortunately, I have an addiction to rambling, and this video was over 3 hours again. And I thought, maybe that is a little too long for a video where I'm literally only covering one volume. So I decided to split it up into 2 different videos. It would have felt a bit weird to have the first hour and a half of me talking about one volume and then spending the same amount of time just talking about the series as a whole. So yeah, I figured this was probably the better route to go. So later in the video, when you hear me say that we will be covering more than just NT22R in this video, just know that Emerald is a liar. And you know what we do to bubble-blowing liars. We kill them. But anyways, let's continue with the video, and I will leave it to Past Emerald. Welcome to my super secret channel, Emerald, where I ramble about whatever I feel like in the laziest format possible. This is the conclusion of a 2-year running series on this channel. I'm looking at the first video where I talked about volumes 1 through 4, and I uploaded that September 9th, 2021. As recording this, it is September 28th, 2023. My goodness, this has been a long time coming, mostly my fault because I read slow and then I made videos slow, but here we are. I have to say, these videos have changed a good bit over time, at least in the way that I talk about these volumes. Think about the fact that I'm looking at my channel right now, and volumes 5 through 7 I talked about for a grand total of 48 minutes. And if you look at my first video in this series, I talked about New Testament 1 for not even 10 minutes. Clearly, I learned how to talk more in these videos because the last video I made in this series was 3 hours long. I definitely think, and I'll talk about this more later in the video, I definitely think over the course of these videos, I've gotten a lot better at putting into words what it is that I think about something, or why I like something, or maybe don't like something. So that's been one very helpful aspect of this entire channel, really. In my own life, that is. But I have to say, before we get into this video where we will be talking about New Testament 22R, as well as my thoughts and reflections on New Testament as a whole, I just want to say thank you to anyone that has watched any of these videos. I think when I started this series, I probably had like 50-ish subscribers, and we've multiplied that by 10, despite the fact that I literally do not advertise these videos or ever ask anyone to subscribe, but that's pretty awesome. It's been very encouraging to receive as many comments as I have. That's really my favorite part about these videos, is the comment section. But it's been very encouraging getting as much engagement on these videos as I have over these 2 years. So once again, thank you to anyone that has checked out this series at all. But anyways, we will go over New Testament 22R, last volume in New Testament, and then I've got a few other stuff that I plan to do after that in this video. Surprise, surprise, I made a volume tier list that I'll just kind of quickly show off at the end. And as I promised, I will be answering your guys' questions that you may have had for me about this video series or New Testament or whatever it may have been related to Tuaru after I'm done talking about the last volume. So, New Testament 22R. You know, I always give the TLDR, and it's the same thing every time. I really liked this volume. Well, no exceptions here, because New Testament 20R was a phenomenal volume to end on. I really loved it, and it hits right in the feels for a massive Tuaru fan. So let's just get right into it, bros. And yes, I'm calling you bros because I looked at my channel analytics recently, and I saw that 100% male audience. Let's go. So, to open up the volume, we get a little bit of insight to Anna Sprengel. Hopefully I pronounced her name right. We get a little bit of insight into her character and probably a lot of the themes that we're going to see going forward in GT, which obviously a lot of it's not going to make sense from just this volume because she speaks very poetically and kind of artistically. And a lot of what she's saying here is pretty vague, so not a ton we can get out of it, but I did want to point out some things about her. So let me go ahead and read you this quote here that kind of is the best insight we have for her character at this point. She says, "Yes, I am sick of being a queen. I want to turn my damp eyes heavenward and hold out my hands to catch the rays shining down from between the clouds. I want someone out there to grant me miracles and blessings I can devour while I enjoy my life. In that sense, I do appreciate a world that keeps on going even when it's attacked and broken." Like I said, she talks very poetically, and I quite like that, but it's also pretty hard for me to really understand exactly what she means. But I think the implication when she says, "I am sick of being a queen," kind of implies that she's tired of being at the very top where she doesn't really struggle for anything, and she's not at the whim of anyone higher than herself. And how I interpret the rest of this, without, obviously I don't have any knowledge of her character in GT, I have no idea what she does or goes through in GT, but what I can gather from here and what she's saying, well, she says she wants to turn her damp eyes heavenward, and I would assume that would mean that she wants to experience some sort of sorrow or pain, and she wishes to find someone who can release her from those feelings. I guess she wants to experience something kind of like a normal human's life, in the sense of we kind of go through this cycle of conflict and relief, and currently that's not really something that she can experience. Another thing I definitely have to point out about her is her like really odd sort of masochism. I usually hate masochistic characters in anime. They're usually the most annoying characters whenever they're present, but this is a way different take on that. And the reason I say it is because she visits historical torture chambers to test out the devices on herself. So she's obviously trying to experience and inflict some sort of pain on herself, which is, I think you can see where I get the masochism from, but it's obviously like super exaggerated. And of course, because we're talking about Index here and Kazuma Kamijou is a pervert, of course there's like a sexual tone. She basically talks as if she wants to be dominated, pretty much. Like there's even a line that says that like she rubs her slender neck like she was longing for a collar she had never worn before. So yeah, she is absolutely a freak, but I am not going to pretend that I don't like it. But unfortunately, that's all we really get in this volume of my new waifu, Anna Sprangle. And then we move on to basically they're throwing a sort of celebration party after all the events that have taken place in the Kronzon arc, and we get what is honestly a pretty drawn out scene of Mikoto, Index, and Shokuho all like getting dresses for the party. And you know what? I don't have anything to say about it except that it's cute and funny. Well, it's kind of like I did have one little comment. I feel like even in scenes like this, Index doesn't really talk much, and that's kind of disappointing. She is the namesake of this series. I notice this a lot. A lot of times, I will literally forget that Index is even in a scene, because if there's a bunch of other characters, Index doesn't usually say hardly anything. You can go back to, like, I think New Testament 2, and I think even maybe Old Testament 17, the British Royal Family arc. I remember in those two volumes, Index was literally like in the room and there and present, and she basically didn't say anything. Or at the very least, enough time would pass without her saying anything that I would forget that she was there in the room with the other characters. But I do have my theories that Index will probably not really have her own sort of character arc until probably pretty close to the end of the series as a whole. I like Index. I think she's fantastic in the first arc, and she does have a really good backstory. But after that, she really just doesn't do much. And that's disappointing, because I want to root for Index, but Kamijou does not like to throw her many bones. The only bones that she's getting are Toma's after she's bitten all the way through his flesh. But yeah, we also get some compelling commentary from the three ladies themselves about British food. And I'm just gonna say, they have my support. I'm sorry to the Brits out there, but beans on toast looks really gross to me. That looks absolutely disgusting. I won't say all British food looks bad. Some British food actually looks pretty good. But beans on toast, and then there's another one. It's I think it's called a chip sandwich. And when they say chips, they mean like basically French fries. So it's literally like French fries stuffed between bread and then like ketchup or whatever sauce. That sounds horrible. That sounds so dry. Oh, you think just throwing ketchup on it or some stupid sauce is gonna make that better? That sounds awful. But we'll give some credit. I do think some like British breakfast looks pretty good in the pictures I've seen. I've never properly tried any like full-on British meals, I guess. So I'll give you the benefit of the doubt, but I'm not changing my mind on beans on toast or chip sandwiches. But I have to point out another thing that Shokuho says here. It's very deep. She says, anything that puts avocado in sushi rice should really just be called American food, said Shokuho. We aren't about to claim it as our own. And you know what? I understand, Shokuho. I'm not the biggest sushi fan personally. I've had like the most like basic like salmon roll I can tolerate. It's not awful, but one time I was eating out at a Japanese place, quote unquote Japanese place with some friends, and they forced me to try this sushi that had crab, avocado, and cream cheese. And I mean it when I say that was the grossest thing I think I've ever tried in my life. I thought it was absolutely abysmal. I unironically gagged when I ate it. It was really that bad. I'm sure other people like it. No one else there thought it was weird, but I thought it was just pretty putrid. And I'm pretty sure like no one eats anything like that in Japan. It's just like the indomitable American will to somehow mutate every other country's food in whatever maniacal way that we can possibly fathom. But anyways, all is well that ends well, I guess, because I think later in the volume they ended up like actually kind of liking the sushi. But I will never not laugh at how basically every other country just completely dunks on English cuisine, but like Englishmen will so staunchly defend it. It's I think it's hilarious. I think it's funny. But yeah, anyways, that's enough of Shokuho's hot culinary takes. Apart from them, let's talk about Toma. So Toma has an interesting conversation with Ramea and I believe Elizard as well. Elizard gives a pretty cool little short speech about upholding peace in the United Kingdom, as well as not allowing her country to fall or stray in the wrong direction. Very cool, Elizard, very cool. I really want to talk more about what Ramea has to say, because Toma has a one-on-one conversation with Ramea, and I did actually talk about this in my last video, but I'll talk about it again here a little bit more in depth. But Ramea has a completely different perspective on if they should honor Aleister Crowley after what he did in assisting and fighting Karanzan. While everyone else kind of felt the need to honor and celebrate Aleister for what he did and helping everyone else, she views it a lot more pessimistically. And I like this because it's cool characterization for her, and it also, like a big point that I talked about in the last video, is we get a unique perspective that is different from everyone else's, and you, the reader, are allowed to come to your own conclusion about it. The story doesn't just tell you, yes, this is exactly how you're supposed to feel for Aleister. The other characters are feeling this way about Aleister, so you must feel that way as well. No, we're presented with a character who respectfully feels differently about the situation, and it's presented in a lot more interesting of a way than a lot of other stories would do. I'll go ahead and read a quote from her here. She says, "What someone considers the best possible choice cannot be determined by anyone else. If that is what that criminal chose in reference to Aleister, there's no negating the action he took, no matter how we might judge it. For me, Magician Crowley is still an eccentric pervert who could not compromise with the society around him and drowned himself in magic, drugs, and boys. But the board chairman Aleister you knew was different, wasn't he? Then go tell people about the person you saw from your position by his side. Throw out all those official titles and tell people about Aleister Crowley simply as a human. So even though she herself does not view Aleister in a particularly positive light, even now, but she does respect the perspective that others will have on Aleister, who knew a different side of him than what she knew. So as small of a scene as that was in this volume, it was something that kind of stood out to me. It was something that I quite liked as I was reading it. To move on from that, we also get a handful of sort of heart-to-heart conversations between different characters, like between Shokuho and Mikoto. Pretty great, in my opinion. There's definitely a lot to say about Shokuho in this volume, which obviously we'll get into. But there's a really cool moment here where Mikoto and Shokuho kind of talk about their own fears to each other. They open up to each other a bit, and it's interesting to see because obviously they're rivals, but at the same time, they're two girls that kind of understand each other in a way that no one else really can. So after many interactions between these two, just being obviously really bitter and full of banter, it's nice to finally see them kind of being honest with each other in a way. We learn more about both of their fears and vulnerabilities, like I said, and I particularly like Shokuho here because we learned about a lot of her fear of loneliness, loss, not having full control of a situation, things being out of her control, probably a better way to say that. And that makes a lot of sense, of course, because of, you know, what we know about her from New Testament 11, and it perfectly suits her and her ability, mental out. Well, if she fears things being out of her control, well, there you go. Her power is quite literally mind control. It's very fitting. And we also kind of get to understand why it is that she acts the way that she does, and the reason that she's built the factions that she has is due to her horrible fear of loneliness and losing what it is that she has. And obviously she's already experienced this to a traumatic extent with Toma in New Testament 11. She lost the relationship that she had with Toma, whom she had fallen in love with. So I just have to say that I really love the entire characterization of Shokuho Misaki. Everything from her motives, her behavior, her fears, her vulnerabilities, her personality, and her power itself, everything makes sense together. As someone who fears having no control of something in a situation, it makes perfect sense why her ability is mental out. For someone that has built the largest faction in Tokiwadai, it makes sense that she fears loneliness. It makes perfect sense why she knows so much about everything going on in Academy City, why she collects so much information. Deep down, she is an extremely paranoid and anxious girl. She's experienced traumatic loss, and she fears having to go through that again. But despite everything that she has gone through, she's still actually a fairly strong character at heart. With her ability mental out, it is such an obvious temptation, such an obviously strong temptation that at any time she can just rewrite her own memory and be completely freed of this pain. But she doesn't allow herself to do it because she does actually have a sort of moral code. She does actually have an understanding of what makes life meaningful to some extent. She will not allow herself to rewrite her own memories because she understands the significance of those memories. One of my favorite sayings ever that I've actually tried to take to heart as much as I possibly can is, don't cry because it's over, be happy that it happened. And Shokuho's character perfectly embodies that. Or at least I should say she embodies the pursuit of that idea, because obviously there's still sadness and anxiety in her heart from what she's gone through. And yes, she still clings to some hope that one day Toma will remember her, but she knows that there is significance in the events that happened, and she doesn't want to forget about that because it's an important part of her life, and it has helped shape her into the person that she is today. One of my favorite anime ever, it's an anime called Plastic Memories. I doubt very many people have seen Plastic Memories. It's not an unpopular show, but it's also not a particularly popular show. And I guess this is a side tangent, but it's something I want to talk about because it's something, this explains why it is that I love Shokuho as a character so much. But in Plastic Memories, basically, I won't like really spoil anything, but it's kind of, once you know the premise, it's kind of obvious. Anyways, so basically in Plastic Memories, you have what is called a Giftia, which is basically like a robot that lives for about 9 years. But obviously they don't look like 9-year-olds. They look like, full-grown adults or whatever, right? But they're basically like androids. And it's a romance anime, so you can imagine exactly where that goes. I shouldn't even have to say. But basically, the main character falls in love with one of these Giftias, but there's the obvious anxiety between the two that she's not going to live for a very long time. Their relationship will not last a long time, but they still have these strong feelings for each other, and they want to continue in their loving relationship for as long as they possibly can, despite the tragic ends that they know it's going to come to. It is very obvious how the story's going to go from the very beginning until the end, but that doesn't matter because the message is so strong. You shouldn't enjoy a story just because something is surprising. You should enjoy a story because there's a strong sort of theme or message that means something to you. Everyone loves surprises. Surprises are what get people excited. When you live your mundane life, any surprise that you can get that's good, hopefully not bad, is a blessing. It is something that gives you this sort of dopamine, and you just want it over and over again, right? You want to experience this sudden sense of awe that you never could have expected, and it's super engaging, and you're like in the zone. You're focused entirely on this thing because it surprised you so much. But what will stick with you is not usually the surprise. What will stick with you is the message, or the themes, or the overall experience. And I have gotten completely sidetracked. My point was though, the reason I love Shokuho's character so much, and on a purely personal level, I'm not saying you have to love Shokuho, on a purely personal level, Shokuho represents a lot of themes that really resonate with me. She is a very flawed character, and that is exactly the point. And I think with that, there's just so much that you can unpack with her character. There's a lot more to her than just being a fat-tittied middle schooler. She's actually quite a deep character, if you ask little old me. But to wrap up what it is that I got from this discussion with Mikoto, and a little Kamijou deep dive on Shokuho's character, just to kind of summarize, I like how logically consistent a lot of her behavior and actions and scenario is. I find it interesting that she is a controlling person as a result of her fears. I think it fits excellently with her powers, and kind of makes you wonder if a person's Esper abilities are influenced by their nature, by the way. So it's a little thought that popped in my head. I like that there's this sort of admirable quality to Shokuho that even though she has this clear temptation to use mental out on herself and forget her pain, she actively refuses to do it because she understands the significance of those memories. I like how clearly her vulnerabilities have actually affected her position in this series. Like I said, she fears loneliness, so what she did was she built this clique, this huge clique around her to counteract that, as well as her fear of missing crucial information and not having a full understanding of what's going on around her. I think it's surprisingly consistent and surprisingly meaningful. And I want to point out one little line here that I really liked as well, is that the difference between a superiority complex and an inferiority complex was paper thin. And I think that's a wonderful, thought-provoking line that also quite well describes Shokuho as a character. On the surface, it would clearly seem that she has a superiority complex, but it's not. The deeper dive that you take into her character, the more you understand that's not really the case. You could really say a superiority complex is just a front for someone who within really has an inferiority complex. Also, I should mention, at this point in the volume, Toma seemingly remembered Shokuho's name, but of course with the twist in this volume, which I'll talk about soon, that's not our boy. That's not our boy. So in these instances where quote-unquote Toma remembers Shokuho, it is really just a false hope. Moving on, before we get to the meat and potatoes of this volume, we get a little update on Holegres. And my goodness, talk about best character development in the series. Holegres is now on good terms with Agnes and has seemingly changed quite a lot. And we'll actually get another pretty cool scene with him later in this volume. And I'm just like, Kamachi, why did you develop this random, like, fat, annoying noble so well and make him such a Chad? But yeah, despite everything that he did, the views that he had on the nuns and his attempt at honestly like trying to get them killed, he has acknowledged the errors of his ways and he has changed for the better, genuinely. Another thing to note is we found out that Westcott from the Golden Cabal kind of made a 10,000 IQ play. So Westcott knew that Anna Sprengel actually existed, but he intentionally lied to hide her from the other Golden members. So, as I understand it, he faked the Anna Sprengel letters that everyone in the Cabal knew about, while knowing she was actually real, but purposefully making it appear as a lie so that no one would look further into it. But Alistair used the Sprengel letters to set up a clash between the Mathers and the Westcott factions, and Westcott would have known that he was being set up, but he allowed the Battle of Blythe Road to happen anyways, because that would, if a great conflict broke out over his failure, it would only make the he faked the whole thing theory sound more convincing, which is kind of insane to think about. Another thing I have to point out, I mentioned this in my last video, but Kamachi did the exclamation point question mark thing. There's one line that says, "The upset kitty widow?" in reference to Mina Mathers. I absolutely had to point that out. Anyways, let's get to the twist here. TLDR. At the end of New Testament 22, basically it leaves off with Toma something crazy happening with his arm, and then it cuts away from him and we don't know what happens at the end. And then in this volume, it's not even mentioned until chapter 2, I think, of NT22R. So this entire time you're kind of wondering, well, what the heck happened at the end of NT22? What's going on here? How did that resolve? Well, basically what happened is his right arm, like, materialized, and we are calling the materialization the one who purifies God and slays demons, which is like the actual meaning of Toma's name. But he has taken on Toma's appearance, and now Toma is like a blue-yellow dragon thing. So the real Toma, who is the blue and yellow dragon thing, shows up at the castle place, wherever they are, and slams into this poser Toma that's trying to steal his life. And of course, here, now that we know the twist, we can gather why it is that this fake Toma, the one who purifies God and slays demons, was able to remember Shokuho's name. Well, that's because, as I understand it, basically he is the right arm, and he's experienced everything that Toma has experienced up to this point. But of course, him being the right hand, his memory was not wiped like Toma's was at the end of the very first arc of the series. So now he, I guess, got bored of being the right arm and has decided that he's just going to take over Toma's life now. It goes a little bit deeper than that, but we'll talk about that later. But the real conflict occurs now, here, because as we are presented with two Tomas, Toma, the real Toma, who's a blue and yellow dragon, can also revert back to like his human form, but his right arm is still like the blue and yellow dragon arm thing. Yeah, so everyone sees two Tomas, and everyone's wondering, well, who's the real Toma? Who do I trust? And shout out to Misaka Mikoto, a real one. She knew pretty much immediately that Tuxedo Toma was not the real one when the real Toma did show up. But, unfortunately, Itsuwa bros, we didn't quite make it. Itsuwa is here. I guess I didn't really mention that because it wasn't, like, important, but she did not think that that was the real Toma. So she failed. Sorry, Itsuwa, you can never marry Toma. You've been taken out of the race. But then we have Shokuho. And disaster strikes because Shokuho is presented with two Tomas. One that she knows is the real Toma, but doesn't remember her. And the other that she knows is not really the real Toma, but he has the memories of her. He witnessed everything that they went through in New Testament 11, and she succumbs to the temptation of once again living alongside the Toma that remembers that summer. And then she goes berserk mode, kinda, and she uses her power in the craziest way we've ever seen up to this point, and she kinda basically stops everyone in their place with mental out. Don't ask me the logistics because I didn't write it down, but all you have to know is that she used mental out to turn everyone against the real Toma, and then immediately regretted it, because why wouldn't you? But jokes aside, I actually really love this entire setup with Shokuho. She felt as if she has been granted a blessing, as supposedly Toma can finally recognize her, and just for that fortune to be completely ripped from her hands as the real Toma, who cannot remember her, appears, and she is faced with this awful dilemma where she must either choose between a harsh reality or a fake fantasy. And I thought it was a really emotional scene as she was breaking down, and she showed so much desperation, using mental out on everyone at the party before they can confine the two Tomas. That's what they were going to do. They were going to like put them in jail or whatever, as if that's going to really do much. But it was legitimately painful to see her say this one line where she said, "That's the Kamijou-san I spent my summer with." And another line where she said, "But if there are two Kamijou-sans and one remembers me while the other doesn't, ... It is very clear that this is what Shokuho wants most in the world. She has fallen in love with Toma, and she wants nothing more than to be by his side and bond with each other once again as they did during that one summer. I think a feeling I would compare it to is something of like a lost nostalgia. Like you have one memory in your life, maybe from your childhood or just whenever, that was really important to you. It stands out as one of your best memories in your entire life, but you know you can never experience it again. And maybe this is a silly comparison, but imagine like your favorite game you've ever played in your entire life, or maybe your favorite anime or whatever it is. You can only really experience it that one time where it like fully captivates you and you're entirely engaged with it, and it's like the best thing you've ever experienced in your life. And you can never feel the same way whenever you rewatch that show or you replay that game. It will never feel the exact same way that it did the first time. All you can do is sit there and you can go through it again, but all you're really going to be doing is reflecting on a time period that you thought was much better than right now. And so for Shokuho Misaki, this is her most precious memory that she knows she can never really once again experience because of the circumstances. But she falls for the temptation to once again experience that with this little skinwalker Toma. So deep down, she knows what the correct choice is, but she can't bring herself to reject this Toma that did retain his memories of their time together. She wants to believe that this is really the Toma that she spent her time with. But she really knows that, of course, that is not the case. And I feel like there's some significance to the fact that Shokuho is forced with this awful luck, as the one she loves can never retain memories of her. And Toma, comparatively, is also cursed with bad fortune and has lost his memories of his past life. And if I'm being honest, I probably should not step into the deadly, lethal world of shipping. But when you kind of contrast that aspect of both of these characters, I feel like it kind of makes sense for somehow this series to end up with those two together. I'm not saying that I think it absolutely will happen. I mean, honestly, he'll probably just end up with Index. I don't know. I don't really care that much. Index is great, regardless of who Toma ends up with. I don't really have much stock in that whole debate. But I'm just saying that I think that would be a pretty touching thing to happen at the end of the story. But I'm not gonna make any predictions about that. That's just my thoughts. I also want to take note of what I think is one of the most important themes in Index, and I think that's identity. Kamijou seems to love discussing the theme of identity because it's discussed here once again in NT22R as fake Toma claims in this volume that Toma can't really be Toma without Imagine Breaker. And that just obviously ties directly with the identity crisis part of New Testament 9. It's brought up a lot in this series. What is it that defines Toma? Who is really Toma? In New Testament 9, it very blatantly discusses anyone could have gotten Imagine Breaker, and they would have been, quote-unquote, Kamijou Touma. It's discussed again right here in this very volume. It's discussed at the beginning of the series when he loses all of his memories and he is emulating how he believes pre-memory loss Toma would have acted. So yeah, from my perspective, it just seems like this theme of identity has been very constant throughout the entire series of Index, especially in regards to Toma himself. I also want to point out, I made another comparison to Saint Germain. I think I love Saint Germain a lot more than I probably did when I read New Testament 12, because I find myself always thinking about what it was that Saint Germain represented, and I compare Saint Germain to a lot of characters later on. But I noted that fake Toma coincidentally reminds me of Saint Germain, because basically he starts role-playing as Toma, believing that if he possesses the same knowledge or body, then he can simply become Toma. Just thought that was a little interesting coincidence. There's another scene I want to talk about because I thought this was hilarious. I was laughing when I read this. But the real Toma hits fake Toma with a glass wine bottle, which is pretty intense because it's obviously it's glass, and it reminded me of this one Sam Hyde sketch where he trips a woman into a glass table, and it's just completely over the top shock value.
I'm getting more wine.
No, help yourself. $36 a bottle. Please enjoy it.
Man just had no remorse for himself, I guess. Among all the chaos that is ensuing at this point, I also just had to say, it's a pretty wild feat for Shokuho to take control of the entire castle, including Mikoto, for a little while. But then Toma does escape, and I forgot, actually, it does cut back to more scenes with Anna Sprangle, who just casually eats Saint Germain bacteria. So the Saint Germain bacteria was whatever place she went to that I don't remember. And this is not the first time that she's done that. Pretty epic. So I'm just gonna make it official. Anna Sprangle is my new waifu. Don't worry, guys. I can fix her. It's all right. She's gonna be, when I'm done with her, she's gonna be a totally normal girl. That sounded like a threat, because it was. Anyways, we get some complex explanation of a theory called magical memory, something like that, where you can trace your memories back in stages and recall parts of your past life, and timing the fertilization of an egg with someone's death. Alistair, for some reason, believed he was the reincarnation of Eliphas Levi, a magician guy. That means not very much to me, but I'm sure it means a lot to someone that knows who that guy is. But apparently the theory had something to do with why this whole incident with Toma and Imagine Breaker happened. Not gonna lie, I didn't really understand it very well. My guess was that basically because Toma's body was healed while Imagine Breaker was severed, his brain's network was reconstructed, assuming it was normal to not have Imagine Breaker. So when he did get Imagine Breaker back, then that means there was a clash between his brain network without Imagine Breaker fusing with the factor of Imagine Breaker itself and the related memories, thus causing the separation. I think the question here is actually why when Toma's arm was reattached, did he not regain his past memories? Or where did those formless memories go from Imagine Breaker? Iwas says, couldn't the two unnecessary parts have gathered together instead of going off in separate directions? So I think the implication is, why didn't Toma regain his memories from his life before the end of the Index arc, as well as his memories of Shokuho? I want to say that this could be foreshadowing for Toma regaining all of his memories later on in the series. I could see that being the case. If I'm off base, then definitely let me know in the comments. Another thing that is mentioned a few times throughout this volume that I also didn't fully understand is they keep mentioning this idea of a symbol representing like multiple different things, and then different people taking the same symbol and pretty much transforming it into representing their own cause or country or whatever it may be. And they use the symbol of a dragon as an example. And basically, the dragon can be representative of the devil, but the dragon is also a symbol for the Anglican Church. And of course, here in this situation where real Toma is like able to transform into this blue and yellow dragon, and then fake Toma opposes him and is basically like trying to steal his life from him. So if I'm taking a shot in the dark, I'm guessing that they're saying fake Toma represents the devil aspect of the dragon, while real Toma represents the skin of the dragon that uses that as a symbol, kind of like the Anglican Church does. So basically, like, fake Toma is the devil, real Toma is more like the Anglican Church in this sort of symbolic nature. That was just kind of my guess. I'm not super confident about that. But in the volume, it keeps hammering home this same idea over and over again. And even in my notes, I didn't ultimately come to any conclusion about it. It feels like Kamachi's throwing a lot of hints right at my face with a lot of like vague sort of bits of dialogue about it here and there. I'll read one, and it's basically just like a list of what the dragon can represent. And so I'll put it on screen. It says a dragon, sky blue, lemon yellow, a right arm, a guardian of treasure, the ruler of the depths, the devil, a symbol of what must be defeated, a house crest, separation, that which breaks the balance. So it's just listing everything off that the dragon can represent, along with the sky blue and lemon yellow. That's just what Toma appears as right now. Maybe there's some significance to the colors. I don't really know, but I don't have a good guess as to what I think the purpose of all of this is. I feel like there's a reason that this is pointed out a few times throughout this volume, but it's hard to definitively say what exactly this means, and like, is this going to be relevant or meaningful in the future of Index? I would hope so. I would hope that if I read the entire series by the time it's concluded and came back to this, that it would make sense to me. I can only really guess that it's some sort of hint as to the true nature and origin of Imagine Breaker. But if anyone can enlighten me about that, feel free, because I'm kind of lost. Moving on, we get a conversation as Toma escapes from the party. We get a nice conversation between him and Othanis, the little understander. And if Othanis is not the realest girl you've ever seen, then I don't know who is. She always pretty much lays things straight with Toma, tells him what he needs to hear rather than the comforting words he may want to hear. I really want to point out Toma here specifically, because Toma has actually developed quite a lot as a character from the beginning of New Testament, or maybe even just the beginning of this series, you could say. As I talked about earlier with the theme of identity, it's something he definitely struggled with a lot throughout New Testament specifically. But this time, now that we're here at the very end of New Testament, we can clearly see that he's not going to allow this conflict to get the better of him like he has in the past. He's a lot more confident about the fact that he is Kamijou Touma, no matter if he doesn't have Imagine Breaker or someone else is playing the part of Kamijou Touma with everyone surrounded around him. So for Toma to pretty quickly resolve himself to take care of this dilemma and not act entirely selflessly and treat himself as unnecessary, as the volume puts it, is a pretty good indicator of how he has changed up to this point. And I think it's been a really good character arc for him. It's been kind of subtle, I guess. It hasn't been something in your face. Like, if you look at Accelerator, that was extremely in your face character development. He was this like crazy psychotic killer guy in the Sisters arc seemingly, and then he just completely radically changes over the course of this series to where that Accelerator is borderline unrecognizable. But yeah, Toma's development hasn't been like Accelerator's, and that's totally fine. They don't need to be exactly the same in that regard. I think Toma's development, well, Toma's role in the series is not to be a character that develops a ton in the first place. At least not in such a radical way that Accelerator has. Like, Toma is a foundational part of the series for the rest of the cast to act around him. Or at least that's what I think about Toma's role in the series. To move on from that, Toma meets up with a bunch of other characters that were not at the party. He meets up with Accelerator, Hamazura, Takitsubo, Dion, Ramea, and Clyfaw. And the dialogue here I thought was fantastic. In my notes, I even said it was some of the best dialogue that I've read in Index in a while. To start off, I like how Toma describes this fake Toma as being his past, as he holds the memories of Toma before the Index arc and New Testament 11, which is just a cool sort of like metaphysical concept, I guess, that his memories would take physical form in that way. And then that leads to a sort of discussion as Toma comes to the realization that the memories do not define you as a person, even though it may very well feel like that's kind of the case. But as something that Dion says, if she had obtained Alistair's memories, that doesn't mean that that makes her Alistair. She's still Dion because that's her very own soul. She's not the soul of Alistair. She is the soul of Dion Fortune. It does not matter if she has all of Alistair's memories or not. So as Shokuho believed that she saw two Tomas in front of her, one that had memories of her and one that did not, well, the one that did have memories of her was not genuinely Toma. That's not the soul of Toma. That's another entity that was just there to witness such things. And then later in this conversation, Toma kind of reveals his vulnerability. That is, being the pressure of living without his past memories, always feeling like an illusion of who he was up to his memory loss. Basically, he feels as if he needs to emulate past Toma to not disappoint those who created important and valuable memories with him during that time, aka in this case, Shokuho, Index, and his friends and family. And that makes a lot of sense that he feels that way, because think back to the very first arc of the series. He saves Index, and then the little dragon feather thing hits his head and he loses all of his memories. And in the hospital, he initially does not recognize Index when she meets him in the hospital. But once she starts to cry, he does a 180 and he pretends that he does remember Index. He was just joking with her. He didn't want this girl in front of him, who he didn't even remember, to be sad. So he decided to play the character of Toma with his memories from before, so that he wouldn't disappoint her. And he did this with everyone. He did this with his own family. He did this with Mikoto, Tsuchi Mikoto. He did it with basically everyone. It's this very awkward position where he has to act like the Toma that everyone that knew him was familiar with, and he couldn't just act the way that there in that moment that he would be naturally inclined to. And even if everyone found out about his memory loss, and some characters do, I believe Mikoto and Index do at this point, even if everyone knew about his memory loss and accepted the fact that he lost his memories, he can't know for certain that they wouldn't be eternally bothered by it, or that they might value this fake Toma more than him. Meaning that even if the current Toma doesn't want to act exactly like pre-memory loss Toma would, then that may very well bother the people that did know Toma before his memory loss. I guess imagine you knew someone like a childhood friend, and then just one day they lost all their memories and their personality just changed into something kind of unrecognizable. Well, you'd probably be bothered by that, and you would wish for the old friend that you had with this entirely different personality, because that's who you grew up with. That's who you got to know. It makes sense that you would want to be friends with that same person, whereas this feels like an entirely new person. I mean, luckily for Toma, he's still, you know, roughly the same guy. I know people like to point out a lot of the nuances between pre-memory loss Toma and Toma after the fact, but roughly they're still kind of similar, right? It's not like a super drastic personality change. There's definitely like a subtle difference. I remember when I read Biohacker, I was like, yes, this does feel a little different. But at its core, this Toma is still pretty dang similar to pre-memory loss Toma. But anyways, this was all just Toma sort of revealing like probably his biggest vulnerability at this point. But ultimately, he comes to the conclusion that he does not need a good nor logical reason to fight this fake Toma that's trying to overtake his life. It is rightfully his own body, and he's going to take it back for himself and those who have placed their trust in him. I'm going to go ahead and read Toma's little speech here that he has with the other characters in reference to fake Toma. He says, "To hell with him. Maybe he's some incredible key to the mysteries of this world, and maybe he's some pillar at the deepest parts of the person named Kamijou Touma. But I don't give a crap, bro. None of that matters to me sitting right here. I don't need a good reason. The second I see his face, I'm punching it into a bloody pulp. I'm not fighting over some yes or no answer. I don't care if I'm wrong. I'll fight for the people who trusted in me and got me this far. And I'm willing to put my life on the line to do it." Absolutely base speech. Wonderful speech. And he's completely right. You don't need to come up with some stupid debate bro answer as to why he should actually let this other guy keep his body or whatever. It's stupid. It's literally just his body that his soul has resided in for his entire life. There's no reason beyond that you even need to consider. So yeah, pretty cool moment. Another thing I want to talk about is Dion Fortune kind of talks about the Fool tarot card thing for a little bit. Very proudly so, I will add. And from what I got out of it, as I understood it, the Fool tarot, whatever card, is not unanimously prescribed a number in the Arcana. It can pretty much be placed as 0 or 22, 23, or anywhere in between, really. And even in the essence of the cards themselves, the Fool is constantly like wandering / traveling. So basically, this can be an analogy for Imagine Breaker, as it's always changing forms and reappearing in the world throughout history. It could have left Toma to materialize somewhere else the many times that his arm was severed, but it did not. At least until this situation right here and now, where the fake Toma has Imagine Breaker, though theorized to not really be the full extent of Imagine Breaker, but that's kind of whatever. But to move on from that, I want to get to an even more compelling part of this conversation, is as we have the 3 protagonists here and a few other characters, we get a very cool exchange as all of them discuss how it's the circumstances and their personal goals or feelings that determine who they side with or what they work towards. And we've seen that constantly through New Testaments. It's one of the coolest things about Index. We constantly see all 3 protagonists on different sides of any conflict, and sometimes they oppose each other. Great example, New Testament 12. There was a fight between Hamazura and Toma in New Testament 12, because their goals and their personal feelings and their circumstances were completely different. So even though both of them are protagonists and they're both generally the good guys, they can still oppose each other. So, and even besides that, the Karanzan arc, well, Hamazura sided with Karanzan, Accelerator vaguely with Alistair, and yet here they all are together cooperating for a new goal. They won't always be on the same side in every conflict, but they also won't always be against each other in any conflict. There's a lot of, dare I say, nuance that can happen in any given arc that would allow for these different sides to form in a reasonable manner. So I really love this sort of moment of collective retrospection from all of the characters right here. We get a few different other interesting points brought up. Accelerator makes a funny point that in this day and age, anyone can build up an anonymous identity through the internet and obtain a good life, irregardless of their IRL reputation. So the anxiety of past decisions means a lot less now than it once did. I mean, even though there's, things like cancel culture, social media, and whatever, but theoretically, anyone can just make an anonymous identity. They can make a new alias and kind of have a new life on the internet. It's not perfect, but I mean, the point is that even if your in real life reputation was awful, at least you would have somewhere that you could escape to. Just kind of an interesting point that Accelerator made. I want to talk about Hamazura here because I really loved what Hamazura had to say. He pretty much holds this "it's not that deep" mentality here. Pretty cool. He really readily admits that he may have just sided with fake Toma had he first met him, or had he met him first, I mean. And he's largely unconcerned with who Kamijou Touma really is. He's simply accompanying him now because it feels like the right thing to do in this moment. And I'm sure you could say that Hamazura just doesn't have like a moral standard or whatever. And I mean, you may very well be right. He may not really have a moral standard. In fact, he probably doesn't. But it is kind of commendable to an extent that he can just view this situation and just simply do what he thinks is the right thing to do, instead of maybe just not making a decision at all. So as Toma has come to everyone here presenting his issue, there's no like, oh, well, you have to prove it to me first. It's just, I see this guy that needs help, and I think it's the right thing to do, so I'm going to help him. And that's always what I've kind of liked about Hamazura, is that he approaches a lot of things with this sort of "it's not that deep" mentality, and he just does what he thinks is the right thing to do. He's very much so a layman, and I think that's why he's a pretty endearing protagonist compared to the other two. You could say Toma definitely shares a lot of that as well, but Hamazura really does feel much more like a real person that you may relate to personally, or you just know someone that's a lot like that. So that sort of realistic or relatable nature is what I've always kind of liked about Hamazura. I'll also point out that no one at this table particularly cares about the origins of Toma. Only Toma would be paranoid of this entire situation that's going on. It's a good reminder that not everyone cares as deeply about something that you perceive as an issue nearly as much as you do. If I were to make an example, make a comparison like I always like to do in these videos, I think any artist, anyone that creates anything will probably understand this. So I've obviously talked about it a lot. I make music, and when I make a song, I am so deeply aware of so many problems with that song, and I always think, oh dude, this one thing I messed up on, or one thing I can't get right, song completely ruined. Everyone's gonna see through it and see that I'm a phony and the song sucks, and then I'll show it to someone and get their opinion on it. It's like, oh dude, cool song. No, I have no idea what you're talking about. It's fine. Almost every single time, you make the biggest deal out of your own problems than anyone else in the world, and this scene is a good reminder of that. So as we're all discussing these things at the table, I took note of a few quotes that I really liked. So one thing Othana says is, "What meaning is there in fearing what you do not know and denying the things that you do know?" We get a very cute, heartwarming little quote from Mrs. Dion Fortune. She says, "It isn't memories or the lack thereof that changes people. That change comes from faith and love." Amen, Dion. And a quote from, well, just the narration, but I liked it. And it said, "What looked like the biggest of problems to him was no big deal to the people around him." And overall, I think there's just a very good message here about moving forward and not wallowing in the past. There's a lot that you can gather from this conversation between all these characters, but for the sake of time, we'll just move on. I'll finish off that sort of discussion by saying that, again, I'm realizing here that now that we're at the end of New Testament, that largely the biggest themes to gather from this journey up to this point is that of identity, the validity of relationships, and necessary selfishness. Those three ideas are plastered all over New Testament. It is, to me, that is what I got out of New Testament the most, I think. But that's just my opinion. I want to know, what thematically did you guys get the most out of New Testament? What was the message or theme that you got a lot out of when you read this series? Let me know in the comments. Anyways, let's move on to another great part of this volume. I'm remembering how good this volume was that I read like 5 months ago. We get some insight into the mind of fake Toma. And you know that a villain is good when you kind of start agreeing with what they're saying. And that was kind of the case here with fake Toma. As Queen Elizard is pretty much frozen in place temporarily, he has a little chat with her. And my goodness, when I was reading this, I was thinking the whole time, you know, he's got a pretty good point. At one point, he accuses Elizard of using people to protect her own country, and then she tries to deny that she used them. And he said, "What did the British coup d'etat have to do with my life? You stole Index away for your own purposes and dragged me into it when I had no idea what was going on. And if I had died, I bet you wouldn't have done anything more than shed some crocodile tears for the cameras. And it's not like you gave me anything after I survived either. You would set everything up so you wouldn't lose anything no matter what happened. Am I wrong?" Then he goes on to say, "All I've got is power as an individual, so how did I end up in a position where I could influence a huge conflict like British Halloween or World War III? I find the weaknesses in people and my influence spreads from there like falling dominoes. In the end, that's all Kamijou Touma ever does. Whether you consider that a good thing or not comes down to whether it helps you or not. I bet my enemies see me as some hypocrite who preaches at you while using the dirtiest methods available." Then Elizard says, "This will not last, boy." And then he says, "So the friendship ends once I work against your precious country's interest, does it? I risked my life fighting for you, but none of it's worth risking your own life, huh? It was the same when I was fleeing with Othinus in Denmark. You didn't say a word until you thought I could win. Eternal friendship sure is a fleeting thing." And then the narration goes on to say, "A level 0 had no chance of getting ahead. He did not have incredible athletic ability, a great academic mind, or artistic talent. He had not been blessed with wealth or an influential family. He knew all too well that when someone like that made a single mistake, they were not given a second chance. So, a weak person like him had developed a unique sort of strength that allowed him to dig his heels in even when he was at a disadvantage. Someone like a queen would never understand that persistent strength. And as bitter and entitled and cynical and resentful as he comes off in this discussion, you can see his point. He's done everything for other people and even England as a whole, yet where was his reward? He got nothing for it, and they've never helped him out after the fact either, really. It's always just, oh, let's call in Kamijou Touma to save the day and he'll just do it, and that's it. They don't really do anything for him after the fact. And like he said, they didn't even consider taking his side during New Testament 10 when he was fleeing with Othinus. As I was reading this, it was getting me riled up. I like Elizard and the princesses, but after this I was like, wait, no, actually, screw them. They didn't do anything for Toma. They just used him to resolve a conflict and then threw him away again. And how could the boy who ended World War III quite literally receive nothing after such a feat? It kind of makes you see things from his perspective, no matter how bitter it is. He kind of has every right in the world to hold hatred for other people or expect some sort of reward or something. But when does Toma ever get a reward? Basically never. What happens is he ends up in the hospital. But the funniest part about this little debate with Elizard is that he really tries to see if he can get Villian to fall in love with him instead. I will say, not a bad choice, fake Toma. Picking the beautiful, virtuous, wealthy royalty. There's worse choices. There's way worse choices out there. But jokes aside, the writing here I think is pretty brutal. And as I was reading it, I definitely think this fake Toma embodies a lot of the bitterness, entitlement, cynicism, and resentment and pessimism that the real Toma had maybe suppressed this entire time. Because we all know that the real Toma, he's like not entitled at all, at least on the surface, but he's done so much for other people that you can't help but think he deserves some sort of reward for everything that he's done, and yet he's received basically nothing. So it kind of does seem justifiable that he would be upset with someone with, well, really a country like England who has used him for their own benefit, but really done nothing in exchange for him. And there's also a good point here made that those born without exceptional talent, abilities, wealth, or whatever, they have no excuse to give up on their goals. A talented Esper can give up as soon as their power doesn't work in any situation. We see that all the time in the series, right? But someone like Toma has to deal with all of the disadvantages to accomplish anything. So yeah, really interesting little section here that really makes you contemplate more of Toma's character. Particularly a lot of the negative aspects that don't really get addressed throughout the series. But moving on, then we get the raid on the party, on the castle or whatever, from the three protagonists and the characters with them against everyone that's in this castle. And there's a few that in the castle that they are actually fighting on the side of real Toma because they kind of recognized what the issue was and they're choosing to fight for what they think is right. Great example here is Holegris, the Chad man, no longer fears defeat, and he will just dedicate himself to never pointing his blade in the wrong direction. And now he's fighting back to back with Accelerator in a scene, and it's so funny. Accelerator, obviously, I'm sure you remember that the artwork of Accelerator holding him upside down from, I think it was New Testament 20, it might have been 21. But we went from that to now him fighting back to back with Accelerator. It's just hilarious. I love how much Holegris developed. It's so stupid for such a minor character, but I just love to see it anyways. Another thing is that no one really has anything to gain from this fight except for Toma, but they're all actively choosing to help him because they think it's the right thing to do, which is a heartwarming sort of moment. As for Toma himself, one thing I forgot to mention is that, well, because of this separation that has happened between him and Imagine Breaker, well, actually that also affected Toma's luck. He no longer has the horrible misfortune that he always experiences with Imagine Breaker. But despite the fact that he enjoys that, he's persisting to not get used to this newly obtained luck, because he wishes to obtain his misfortune once again so that he may take back the life he knows and truly remain as Kamijou Touma, because that misfortune has done a lot to shape him as a person. And he also states that he would become a monster if he got used to this quote-unquote lucky lifestyle, which I think is a bit of an exaggeration. I definitely see what he means by it, though, and I definitely admire that perspective of his. Anyways, there's a few different fights that break out during this part of the volume. Toma clashes with Style and Kanzaki once again. There's a lot of callbacks in this volume to the very first arc, so it makes sense that he would fight both Style and Kanzaki at some point. As he's fighting Style, there's one really cool line that says, "Avoiding conflict through compromise was not the only form of friendship," which pretty perfectly embodies the relationship that Toma and Style do have. They basically always clash. There is no sort of compromise between the two. It's a pretty interesting dynamic that those two have in that regard. Another fight that breaks out is between, and this is an interesting one, but AAA Mikoto versus John's pen mode index. Not gonna lie, I don't really remember how John's pen mode activated, but it did. And that is a cool little kerfluffle. Anyways, a scene that I really love during this part is Shokuho throughout this volume up to this point, ever since what happened with the twist, she has been in a complete state of despair. And recognizing that what she has done is wrong, she blows the whistle for the real Toma to find her. You know, the whistle that she had ever since like the New Testament 11 backstory. and she internally feels like there's a significance to blowing that whistle for the real Toma, despite that he doesn't have any memories of that. And she has the realization, of course, that her siding with fake Toma was just ignoring reality in the same way that using her ability on herself would be. Quite a deep little comparison there, which she views as a meaningless action. I'll go ahead and read this quote from her. She says, "I really did know it from the beginning. I knew that was the real you. That's why I blew the whistle to call for someone else even though he was right in front of me. I'm so stupid. If I wanted to ignore reality and have a nice, convenient dream ability, I might as well have pressed the remote to my own head. And I'm the one who said it in the very beginning that would be meaningless." And she says that as she's talking to Toma, who at this point recognizes that he cannot seem to remember who she is. And because of that, he questions why Shokuho did what she did. All in all, I thought this was a really, really great scene. It's a sort of emotional climax for Shokuho that has been hurt by Toma's memory loss this entire time, and Toma, who is now recognizing that there's something strange about this girl. I can't seem to remember who she is or what she looks like or anything, yet clearly we have some sort of connection. So yeah, really great scene. One of my favorites from this volume. Another thing that's going on is Accelerator is fighting with a lizard. And the reason this is interesting is because Accelerator is now the chairman, effectively the chairman of Academy City, meaning that he would be in charge of such diplomatic discussions and whatnot, and foreign relations, of course. And he would have to deal with the lizard on a number of occasions if he plans to be a proper chairman of Academy City. And already we can see how Accelerator is going to be running things very differently than Alistair ever did. And he goes off on a sort of rant to a lizard. And it was a little confusing at first what he was saying, but I think he's trying to say that a lizard is short-sighted and needs to reevaluate her judgments of people and their situations. The reason it was confusing to me is because, well, supposedly if a lizard didn't side with this fake Toma, then all of these divers that England sent to like the ship or whatever, basically they were gonna die. So, I mean, she kind of just wanted to save the divers, I guess. Understandably so, but I definitely don't think it's particularly justifiable for her to this adamantly side with fake Toma. I think Accelerator is right in criticizing her of that judgment. Either way, it's a really awesome exchange. So thank you, Accelerator. Very cool. Okay, last bit of notes here. All right, very cool fight between Accelerator and Lizard overall. He used like a lot of Academy City technology to fight her, which is awesome, but he finishes her off with his own power. Specifically, he's like emulating Toma here, who he's kind of been following in his footsteps in his own way this entire time. I also loved like that this was his sort of diplomatic debut, and ultimately he's just trying to maintain good relations here, which is pretty funny in the way that he's going about it. We also got a fight between Dion Fortune and Kanzaki, which Dion won, and some of it kind of went over my head, but Kanzaki seemed as if she wanted to lose, partially as a form of punishment to herself, because that's just who Kanzaki is, a character who is extremely hard on herself and will quickly want to repent for any of her own wrongdoings. And then with Toma, we get a lot to unpack here at the end of this volume with fake Toma and Imagine Breaker, and as I understood it, as always, correct me if I'm wrong, because I feel like I'm probably wrong about a lot of things in this series, but as I'm understanding it, fake Toma manifested here because real Toma, wished for a way to more effectively use Imagine Breaker, as well as finding the quote-unquote real Toma hidden within his lost memories. So this fake Toma manifested to resolve those regrets. And supposedly, fake Toma had a plan to fix something or save someone, but it's kind of unclear what exactly he was trying to do. He even claims that he would return his body after the day was over, which is, sure, bro. Kind of hard to believe that after everything else you said, but okay. But as Toma and Toma fight in their last little battle, which is an awesome exchange, in a turn of events, fake Toma genuinely wished to save Shokuho, Index, and Misaka. And above all else, he requested that Toma use Imagine Breaker the right way and save everyone that he sees in trouble, like he should have with Alistair, the Golden Cabal, and even Karanzan. And this has been a running idea in the later parts of New Testament, I would say, especially from New Testament 13 onward, with how the entire High Priest situation resolved, that Toma isn't able to reach the optimal conclusions for all of his allies and enemies. And we learn that he was playing up the villain, supposedly, due to the real Toma's reappearance, I should say. Also, he confronts real Toma with descriptions of the Toma from before, who relied on Komoe, pleaded with Kanzaki, and saved Index no matter what it took. And even though it was pathetic of him, that's kind of what defines him, is that he would do things like that, whereas this current Toma now really hates to rely on anyone. But in this situation here, that it actually is how he was able to resolve the problem, is because he asked for the help of others. And there's been a few moments that this has happened in the series. You can think of New Testament 8. He asked Index and Mikoto directly to help him in his fight against Freya, but it is something that is easily forgotten. His comfort zone is to not ask anyone for help and resolve everything that he can by himself. Another notable point here is the speculation of the relationship between the ability and the user, as Imagine Breaker seems to have manifested with its own personality, goals, and even memories that Toma no longer possesses. It makes Toma wonder if the person controls the ability or vice versa. Fake Toma, who I should probably call Imagine Breaker at this point, well anyways, he states that he should not be conscious, but only is because real Toma wished for that to happen, subconsciously. But supposedly, during the war, Toma wished that he could have used Imagine Breaker more effectively, and he questioned if the real way to use Imagine Breaker was hidden in his lost memories, and because of that spawned a few regrets. And then fake Toma, Imagine Breaker, whatever, makes the claim that if it weren't for Toma's regrets, he wouldn't have had to think about anything. He then says, fake Toma says, "I'm nothing more than an ability, something that distorts quantum physics. I was supposed to have nothing of my own. My sense of self, my personality to overcome any adversity, and my memories that you lack, it all only exists because you wished it to." And then, this is where it gets very confusing to me, as it feels like Kamijou is relisting every clue that we have about Imagine Breaker up to this point. He talks about Othinus's theory of Imagine Breaker and it being this sort of like medicine, panacea, whatever thing. It mentions the fact that Terra, all the way back from OT14, seemed to have some sort of understanding as to what Imagine Breaker actually was. Then he references when Toma failed to accept the wishes of the magic gods like High Priest and Nephthys and Yang Yang, and how because of that, a portion of that power had leaked out and then created World Rejector within Kamisato. Then we're once again reminded of the symbolism of a dragon, the ruler of the depths, and a guardian of treasure. Then it mentions the fact that Nephthys and Yang Yang had said that his right hand was something extra, and that the one who purifies God and slays demons referred to Toma himself rather than his right hand, which doesn't really make a lot of sense here, since supposedly this fake Toma is the one who purifies God and slays demons. And then we get another paragraph that questions what exactly Alistair's plan was leading to. He had sacrificed so much to bring his plan to fruition, and he had used everything in order to raise something, but we're questioning, was this actually Imagine Breaker that he was raising, or was it something else? Another thing that's mentioned is that Toma has previously seen an ability that gained an autonomous mind of its own and left the person's control, That being Academy Season number 2, Dark Matter, Kakine, all the way back in New Testament 6 with Rhinoceros Beetle 5. And all of this information is pretty overwhelming. I'm not really sure that we're supposed to understand exactly what conclusion this all points to. I sure know that I don't understand what all of this means. It's very vague, and the way that a lot of this is written is really hard to just understand for me. To be honest, I don't really have any particularly strong theories as to what I think exactly Imagine Breaker is, but I would be lying if I said I didn't enjoy all of the teases about it. As much as I would love to know exactly what Imagine Breaker is, I just don't see that really happening until pretty close to the end of the series. But yeah, I'm pretty much at a loss about it, so if any of you guys, I'm asking you guys a lot of questions this time around, but if any of you guys have any theories about it, without spoiling anything from GT, feel free to let me know. But yeah, anyways, this final fight between Toma and Toma, pretty hype, pretty awesome, probably one of my favorite Toma fights, if I'm being honest. I like the sort of heart-to-heart that they have at the very end, as real Toma is finishing off fake Toma. Fake Toma says basically, I am here because you wished for it, and you just rejected that obvious answer to have it your way. Do not let them die. If you had used this thing right, you might have been able to save the Golden Magicians. At the very least, Alistair didn't need to die and leave his daughter behind. Don't you dare make a mistake like that again. And he says another line that's even more interesting. Before his death, the dragon says, I see. So that's why it chose you. Why it flew in from outside. And it cuts off the word outside. So presumably, that's referencing why Imagine Breaker chose him. The flew in from the outside part, very perplexing. There's no way I think we can understand that at all until way later in the series when we get a full explanation. But it's worth noting that fake Toma talks about Imagine Breaker here not as himself, but as a separate entity. And I just realized that I actually called him Imagine Breaker earlier in this video. Forget I said that. Definitely an interesting piece of dialogue there. Another thing I want to point out about this fight is that I love Toma outright, blatantly wanting to, quote-unquote, kill this fake Toma, and how typically this is not what he ever wants to do in a fight. He does not want to kill someone. He wants to change them, right? But in this instance, he has to kill this entity that has taken over his body and his being. And overall, super great resolution to Toma versus Toma. Absolutely loved that. I thought it was fantastic. Super entertaining. But really, this chapter ends with Toma once again versus John's pen mode Index. And it is basically a repeat of what happened in the very first arc of the series, but this time he's able to save Index, and right before the little dragon feather thing falls on his head, he, at the last second, hits it nonchalantly with Imagine Breaker, and it was awesome. It was sick. Yeah, it was a very short-lived fight, but it was really intense. It was a lot of fun to read. And I don't remember, in this volume it mentioned a black crevice with this strange monster peering out. And I don't remember that happening the first time, but besides that, it was pretty similar. I don't know, maybe that happened in the light novel and just not the anime. I don't remember. But anyways, that happened. A black crevice with a strange monster peering out. Sounds pretty awesome. But the best part of it was really him overcoming the same attacks that she had used in the first arc. And then negating the angelic feather thing that was about to touch his head was just the cherry on top. Wonderfully written. And that is the conclusion to this final conflict here in New Testament. And then the epilogue pretty much just covers the conclusions to every major character's arc here. So just to kind of go through them, Dion Fortune becomes the new archbishop alongside Villian and Fran. It's probably Fran. I'm going to say Fran anyways because I like saying that. So yeah, Dion's the new archbishop replacing Lola Stewart / Karanzan, and Villian and Fran will be monitoring her. That's pretty cool. Pretty awesome conclusion for her. And I liked her reasoning as well, as she kind of comically confesses her guilt that she wants to atone for as a creation of Karanzan's. And Fran as well bears some guilt, which is why she was chosen. Of course, if you recall, she was taken advantage of by Karanzan, and she was kind of like possessed in New Testament 19. As for Villian, she's basically just a very like greedless and virtuous person, so it makes perfect sense for her to watch over her in that position. Then we switch to Accelerator, who has an awesome scene as he announces his new position to the governing board. Just an amazing resolution for his character. Accelerator really is one of the most impressive characters in this entire story, and it is so satisfying to see him reach this point in the story. It's legitimately phenomenal. I've said it before, I'll say it again. Accelerator is just straight up one of the best written characters, best developed characters that I've ever experienced in a story. There's a very heartwarming scene as Toma and Index return home, and it feels like it's been a long time coming, even though it probably wasn't really that much time that passed, but it was nice. It made me feel warm and fuzzy inside. And I was a little disappointed because I kept thinking that as I was reading this volume, I was thinking that when Toma fused back with fake Toma, that he would actually regain his memories of Shokuho, but that did not happen. That did not happen. It may happen one day, but today's not the day. As for Shokuho and Mitsuka, well, they're good. They're alive. They're kicking. Yeah, that's it. Kuriko shows up. Kuriko shows up, and I'm upset. I'm really upset. New Testament, here's the thing. New Testament is actually really bad because Kuriko didn't do anything in it. Kuriko's peak in New Testament was that she passed out from heat exhaustion and she was princess carried for the second time by Toma. And don't get me wrong, that was an amazing scene. Phenomenal scene, 12 out of 10, but I wanted more, wanted a little bit more. But then we switch over to Hamazura and Item, and they have decided to stay in Academy City despite the constant hindrance of the dark side on their backs. They realize that there's really no other place in the world that would suit them, so they wish to make the best of their lives here without any excuses. Tsuchimikado is still alive, he's still around, and he will also return to Academy City, as his goal now is largely to avoid Alistair. That is, after he received a coded message from Alistair, pretty much warning him of the coming threat with Anna Sprangle, and suggesting that since he is no longer the board chairman, as that's been passed on to Accelerator, that he should return to Academy City to achieve the peace that he wants alongside Micah. And last but not least, Iwas and Anna Sprangle are dubious little creatures that are up to mischief. And they're gonna do something, but we don't know what that is until we read GT. And that is a wrap. That is a wrap on that. I will just give my final overall thoughts on it. I think it was a fantastic volume, probably up there with some of my favorites from New Testament. And I'm very excited to see where the series goes with Academy City under the leadership of Accelerator. This volume definitely took a while to pick up, but once the twist happens, it's a fun ride through to the end. The action scenes in this volume I felt were noticeably more enjoyable than usual in my opinion, and especially Toma's fights were a lot more fun here than I feel like they usually are. Actually, I would even say New Testament as a whole really stepped up a lot of Toma's fights. I feel like in Old Testament, so many of his fights are really just not that interesting because, well, there's only so much you can do with Imagine Breaker just holding up your right hand, right? Fights can get kind of boring, but I really felt like there was a bit more energy in a lot of his fights. They were just a little bit more exciting throughout New Testament. I really think New Testament 22R hammered home pretty much the most prominent themes of New Testament, like I already talked about, specifically with identity, necessary selfishness, dealing with regrets. I mean, especially considering the physical manifestation of Toma's regrets and wishes with fake Toma here. Accepting reality. Maybe I'm stretching a bit with that one, but I did feel like that was kind of a theme throughout New Testament that I gathered. Lastly, finding a reason to fight. All ideas that Toma was faced with throughout the many arcs of New Testament. So, like I said, I think this volume really made use of all of those ideas together in this volume. Even though a lot of it was super confusing, I really did love a lot of the Imagine Breaker lore scattered throughout the volume. And every new clue that Kamijou leaves, it really does have me feeling like I'm dying for more. Even though it is very perplexing and I just don't understand a lot of it and I don't really even have any good theories, I always love any new sort of teases about it. I liked the very poetic conclusion as Toma overcomes his own regrets and defeats John's pen mode index, you know, exactly like his journey began. It was definitely a very touching conclusion. I really, really loved the heartbreaking story for Shokuho as she reaches her lowest point and regretfully betrays those that she cares about. It was a real fall from her high position as the queen of Tokiwadai, and I think Kamijou was really brutal with her character here. He really gave Shokuho a taste of what she desired most. Just to take it all away from her was pretty tough to read. I really do like the dynamic between her and Toma. Fake Toma was actually a wish from both Toma and Shokuho in a sense. Toma wished for the return of his past memories, and Shokuho wished for practically the same thing. Pretty cool when you think about it that way. Yet once it was granted, it ended poorly for both parties. This coincides with an earlier statement from Shokuho that she does not wish to lose memories, even if they are painful, as these experiences are what define her. And fake Toma effectively provided the same result as using her ability on herself, devaluing her own experiences. Getting what they had wished for did not provide them the happy ending that they may have expected. It only brought them back to the reality of their current selves, and they may very well both regain what they desire naturally, but for now, that's just not going to be how it is. So yeah, I really, really love the dynamic between Toma and Shokuho. I think there is a lot to unpack between those two. But yeah, overall, fantastic volume, and I think this was a perfect way to end A Certain Magical Index New Testament. This has been a very long, very wild ride lasting 2 years. I just want to say I'm thrilled that I started this series, as along the way I realized that Index it's just my favorite media series that I've ever experienced, I think. There's really nothing quite like this world, these characters, and Cosmo Kamijou's stories. So there you have it, gentlemen and more gentlemen. Like I said in the beginning of the video, my answers to your questions as well as my reflections on New Testament as a whole will be covered in the next video. And that video will come out when it comes out. In the meantime, and you know I hate doing this, you know I hate self-promotion, I say it every time, but over on my other channel, I released my second album, Dark Realities and Seductive Dreams, and oh, look at that. There's like two Aru references in the titles. That's absolutely crazy. But anyways, I would appreciate any traffic on that video or on Spotify or whatever streaming platform you use. I would deeply appreciate it if you checked it out, or even if you just clicked on the video, gave it a like, and didn't listen to anything. That would also be okay. But yeah, I worked on it for like a year, so I feel like I kind of have to at least mention it here at the end. But that aside, I just want to say I appreciate each and every one of you that clicked on this video, especially if you watched it all the way to the end and are listening to me right now. Pretty crazy to think that this is the last volume that I am discussing in one of these videos, for New Testament at least. I know I've said it a number of times in past videos, but I never expected any of these videos to really get anywhere close to the views they did end up getting. I mean, without fail, every single one of the videos in this series has a pretty significant more number of people watching than are actually even subscribed to the channel, and I think that is I think that says a lot about the dedication of the little Tuaru community that we have here on the internet. But yeah, just want to say once again, appreciate everyone that clicks on these videos. This video series has been a very long but also very fun little journey. So in the next video, we'll reflect a little bit on New Testament as a whole, and videos after that, admittedly, will probably be even slower than they have been up to this point. Things will be getting a little bit busier for me in the future here pretty soon, but I still would like to make videos on Genesis Testament whenever I start reading it, that is, but it'll probably be a while until I actually start that up. we'll see what the future holds. But for now, thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope you have a wonderful, I said wonderful, day, night, week, month, year, decade, life.